The Eternal Dominion was an awe-inspiring vessel, a testament to the Galactic Empire's unmatched power. It drifted serenely through the Andrelian Nebula, a fortress surrounded by cascading waves of light and energy. The nebula's hues of purple, gold, and blue illuminated the ship's sleek hull, casting it as both a work of art and a harbinger of terror. Inside the ship's cavernous command deck, Commander Vrelok stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the vastness of space. His uniform, a flowing black robe adorned with insignias of conquest, rippled as he turned to address the officers gathered around a holographic display. "Report," he commanded, his voice a low growl that carried a predatory edge. Lieutenant Drex, a young androian with an overabundance of nerves, stepped forward. His crystalline armor reflected the flickering blue of the hologram. "Commander, we intercepted a human vessel near restricted space. It was attempting to bypass the nebula's perimeter. Scans show it carried a single occupant," Drex reported. Vrelok's golden, slit-pupil eyes narrowed. "A human. In our territory. Curious." Humans were little more than an afterthought in the Empire's grand conquests. Their homeworld, Earth, lay in a sector deemed strategically insignificant. The Empire had long ago dismissed the species as technologically backward and culturally primitive. The idea of a human intruding this far into Imperial space was absurd. "Where is the prisoner now?" Vrelok asked, his tone measured but dangerous. "In detention, Commander. Our scanners detected no weapons or advanced technology aboard his vessel." However, Drex hesitated. However? His ship's navigation logs were wiped clean, deliberately. A flicker of intrigue crossed Vrelok's angular face. He waved his clawed hand dismissively. "Bring him to interrogation. If he's a spy, we'll extract every last secret he possesses." Moments later, deep within the ship's detention wing, Kane sat in his holding cell. The room was sterile and metallic, illuminated by a dim, artificial light that hummed faintly. The cuffs on his wrists emitted a low-energy hum designed to neutralize any attempt at resistance. Kane's outward demeanor was calm, almost disinterested. His gray eyes scanned the room with surgical precision, taking in every detail: the placement of the cameras, the faint hiss of the air ducts, the subtle vibrations beneath his feet that indicated the ship's propulsion systems. He leaned back against the cold wall and let his mind work. The mission had gone wrong. He was supposed to infiltrate the Eternal Dominion undetected, blend in and eliminate his target, Supreme Commander Sire. But now he was here, shackled and under suspicion. Despite the setback, Kane wasn't worried. He'd faced worse. The door hissed open, and Commander Vrelok entered, flanked by two towering Androian guards. Their crystalline armor gleamed under the harsh light, their jagged forms imposing. "Identify yourself," Vrelok demanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Kane tilted his head, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "Kane, just a soldier who got lost in the wrong neighborhood." Vrelok's expression darkened. "Do not insult my intelligence, human. You were intercepted in restricted space, piloting a vessel with no discernible origin. You will tell me your true purpose here." Kane shrugged, his smirk never faltering. "Like I said, just a soldier. Got separated from my unit. No harm meant." Vrelok signaled to one of the guards, who stepped forward and activated a device in his hand. A holographic scanner emerged, its intricate filaments spinning in the air as it moved toward Kane's head. "We'll see if your mind tells the same story," Vrelok said coldly. The scanner latched onto Kane's temples, its filaments glowing brightly as they attempted to probe his thoughts. Kane's smirk faded slightly. He felt the pressure of the device pushing against the barriers in his mind, the neuroblockers implanted by the Umbra Syndicate. For a moment, the device's light intensified, and the air in the room seemed to hum with energy. Then, with a sharp crack, the scanner overloaded, sparks flying as it sputtered and died. The guard stepped back, startled. Vrelok's eyes narrowed. "Well," Kane said, his smirk returning, "guess your tech isn't as advanced as you thought." "What have you done?" Vrelok snarled. Me? Kane raised his cuffed hands innocently. I'm just sitting here. Vrelok clenched his jaw, his sharp teeth visible for a moment. This isn't over, human. I will uncover your secrets, one way or another. As the commander stormed out, Kane leaned back against the wall again, his smirk fading into a look of steely determination. The neuroblockers had worked for now, but he knew the Empire wouldn't stop probing. He had to act before they uncovered the truth. In the command center, Vrelok paced furiously. The malfunction of the mind scanner was an anomaly, and he despised anomalies. He turned to Lezra, the ship's chief interrogator, a tall alien with luminous green skin and eyes that glowed like twin suns. This human is no ordinary soldier, Vrelok said. He's hiding something and I want to know what. Lezra inclined her head. Leave it to me, Commander. I'll peel back his layers one by one. As Vrelok left the room, Lezra turned her attention to the holographic feed displaying Kane in his cell. She studied him intently, noting his relaxed posture, his lack of fear. Interesting, she murmured to herself. Back in his cell, Kane wasn't relaxing. His mind worked at a relentless pace, analyzing every detail, every opportunity. He knew the Empire's protocols, their weaknesses, and their arrogance. But there was one factor he hadn't accounted for: betrayal. Someone had tipped the Empire off, sabotaging his mission before it even began. Kane had his suspicions, but confirmation would have to wait. For now, survival was paramount. He shifted his focus to his surroundings. The guards outside his cell were disciplined but predictable, their movements adhering to a strict rotation. The surveillance drones hovered at intervals, their routes precise and unwavering. Kane filed it all away, a mental map forming in his mind. He didn't need weapons to escape. He was the weapon. And in the lower decks of the Eternal Dominion, a different kind of tension brewed. Tyrea, a former Imperial engineer turned covert rebel, sat in a dimly lit maintenance room with a group of like-minded dissidents. The holographic display before them showed the ship's detention logs, highlighting Kane's capture. He's here, Tyrea said, her voice urgent. The Phantom. The others exchanged uneasy glances. The Phantom. That's just a myth, said one, a burly insectoid alien with sharp mandibles. He's real, Tyrea insisted. I've seen the Umbra Syndicate's encrypted broadcasts. He's their most dangerous operative. If he's on this ship, it's not by accident. And what do you propose we do? Asked another, a lithe, fox-like alien with sharp ears. Even if he's real, he's just one man. Tyrea's blue skin flushed darker, a sign of her determination. One man who's taken down entire fleets. If we can free him, he could be the key to turning the tide against the Empire. The group fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Finally, the insectoid spoke. If we're doing this, it'll be the riskiest move we've ever made. Tyrea nodded. Then it's a good thing I've already got a plan. The Eternal Dominion surged forward through the swirling tendrils of the Andrillian Nebula. Its engines emitted a low, steady hum, vibrating through the labyrinthine corridors of the Empire's flagship. Deep within the ship, the detention wing was quiet, save for the occasional hiss of automated doors and the rhythmic clicking of patrol boots on metal floors. Kane remained seated in his cold, featureless cell. The silence suited him. It allowed his mind to sharpen, to focus on the variables of his predicament. Every piece of information mattered. The slight delay between the guard steps as they passed his cell. The faint flicker in one of the overhead lights, suggesting an irregular power relay nearby. The subtle vibration beneath him that hinted at maintenance shafts running below. To the untrained eye, the cell was impenetrable. To Kane, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The sound of the door sliding open snapped him out of his musings. Two guards entered, their crystalline armor glinting like jagged ice. Between them was a new figure, Lezra, the Empire's chief interrogator. Lezra was tall and elegant, her green skin shimmering under the artificial light. Her luminous veins pulsed faintly, giving her an otherworldly appearance. her eyes, twin orbs of liquid gold, fixed on Kane with an intensity that seemed to pierce through him. "Kane," she said, her voice smooth and measured. "Or is it the Phantom?" Kane's smirk returned, though his posture remained casual. "Phantom. Sounds like something out of a bad spy holo. You've got the wrong guy." Lesra stepped closer, her gaze never wavering. "You underestimate us. We've dealt with rebels, spies, and assassins from every corner of the galaxy. They all think they're invincible. They all break." Kane met her gaze, unflinching. "Let me guess you're the one who breaks them." Lesra's lips curled into a faint smile. "Exactly." She gestured to the guards, who stepped back and activated a device embedded in the wall. The air in the room shimmered as a holographic grid filled the space surrounding Kane. Symbols and lines of energy danced around him, mapping his vitals, neural activity, and even his micro-expressions. "This isn't your average interrogation," Lesra said. Circling him, you won't even feel the probes as they dig into your mind, peeling back every layer until we find what you're hiding. Kane leaned back against the wall, his smirk deepening. "Sounds invasive. You might at least buy me dinner first." The grid pulsed, and Kane felt a faint pressure in his temples. He maintained his calm exterior, but inside, his mind raced. He knew the neuroblockers implanted by the Umbra Syndicate would hold, but the process wasn't without risk. Lesra tilted her head, studying the readouts as they flickered in the air before her. Her brow furrowed. "Interesting. Your brainwaves show unusual activity anomalous patterns." Almost as if she trailed off, her eyes narrowing. Kane seized the moment. "Almost as if I'm just really bored." Lesra's smile returned, though it was colder now. "You're clever, but cleverness won't save you. This is only the beginning." She deactivated the grid and motioned to the guards. "Take him back to his cell. Double the patrols. I want no mistakes." As the guards escorted Kane out, Lesra lingered in the room, staring at the now empty chair. Something about the human unsettled her. He wasn't like the others she had interrogated. He radiated a quiet confidence, a sense of control that didn't align with his circumstances. Lesra's instincts told her there was more to him than met the eye, and she intended to find out what it was. Meanwhile, in the lower decks of the ship, Tyria paced nervously in the dimly lit maintenance bay. The glow of a holographic console cast long shadows on the walls, illuminating the faces of her companions. The rebel cell was small but determined, a mix of alien species, each with their own reasons for defying the Empire. Tyria paused and turned to the group. "The Phantom is here. We don't get opportunities like this often. If we can reach him, he could be the key to bringing this ship down." The insectoid alien Jexar clicked his mandibles anxiously. "And what if he's not what you think he is? What if this Phantom is just a story?" "He's real," Tyria insisted. "I've seen the Syndicate's broadcasts. He's the reason the Empire lost the Vexian fleet 2 cycles ago. He's the reason the Zarlith coalition still exists. If anyone can help us, it's him." Another rebel, a wiry alien named Kalrix with furred ears and sharp features, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Even if he's real, how do we reach him? The detention wing is a fortress." Tyria's blue skin darkened as she formulated her response. "I've been studying the schematics. There's a blind spot in the surveillance grid near the maintenance shafts. If we time it right, we can access the detention wing without being detected." "No," Tyria said firmly. "We disable the security systems and extract him before they know what's happening." The room fell silent as the rebels considered the plan. Finally, Kalrix spoke. "It's risky. But if you're right, it's worth it." Tyria nodded, her resolve unwavering. "Good. Let's get to work." Back in his cell, Kane replayed the interrogation in his mind. Lesra's methods were impressive, but she underestimated him. The neuroblockers had done their job, but they wouldn't hold indefinitely. He needed to act. He shifted his focus to the vent above his cell. It was small, barely large enough for him to squeeze through, but it might be his only way out. The problem was the cuffs. They neutralized his strength and emitted a constant signal that tracked his location. Kane leaned back, closing his eyes as he considered his options. He didn't have much time. Just then, a faint tapping sound caught his attention. It came from the wall behind him, rhythmic and deliberate. Morse code. Kane's eyes snapped open. He listened intently as the pattern repeated. Help is coming. Be ready. He didn't know who was sending the message, but it was enough to ignite a spark of hope. In the detention wing's control room, a lone technician monitored the security feeds. The screens displayed rows of cells, each one occupied by prisoners of various species. The technician sipped a steaming mug of Karnak tea, his focus beginning to wane. He didn't notice the faint shimmer in the corner of the room. T-Rhea materialized, her cloaking device deactivating as she stepped forward. In one swift motion, she pressed a small device against the technician's neck, injecting a tranquilizing agent. The technician slumped over, unconscious. T-Rhea worked quickly, accessing the console and disabling the surveillance cameras in Kane's section of the detention wing. She transmitted a signal to her team, who were waiting in the maintenance shafts. "We're clear," she whispered into her comm. Kane heard the faint hiss of the cell door unlocking. He tensed, ready for anything. When the door slid open, a blue-skinned alien stepped inside, her eyes sharp and determined. "You're not one of them," Kane said, his voice low. "No," T-Rhea replied. "I'm here to get you out." Kane studied her for a moment, then stood, his movements calm but deliberate. "What's the catch?" "We need your help," T-Rhea said. "There's a resistance on board. If we're going to bring the ship down, we need you." Kane's expression didn't change, but his mind raced. He didn't trust her, not yet, but she was offering the one thing he needed, a way out. "All right," he said finally, "but if we're doing this, we do it my way." T-Rhea nodded, her relief palpable. "Follow me." As they slipped out of the cell and into the shadows, Kane felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. The mission wasn't over, it was just beginning. The maintenance shafts of the Eternal Dominion were dark and cramped, their walls lined with pulsating conduits that carried energy throughout the colossal vessel. The air was heavy with the tang of ions particles, a constant reminder of the ship's immense power. Kane moved silently, his steps precise and deliberate as he followed T-Rhea through the maze-like tunnels. Behind them, Jexer and Calrix brought up the rear, their movements less fluid but equally determined. The group halted at an intersection, where T-Rhea knelt and activated a handheld scanner. The device emitted a faint hum as it projected a holographic map of the surrounding area. "We're clear for now," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient hum of the ship's systems. Kane glanced at the map, his sharp eyes memorizing its details. "Where are we headed?" T-Rhea pointed to a blinking dot on the map. "The Central Maintenance Hub. It's our base of operations. From there, we can regroup and plan our next move." Kane nodded, though his expression remained guarded. He still wasn't sure if he could trust these rebels, but they were his best shot at survival and at completing his mission. As they resumed their journey, Kane's mind raced. The mission was already off course. Supreme Commander Xyler, his target, was still alive and commanding the Eternal Dominion. But Kane had learned long ago that improvisation was as crucial as preparation. He glanced back at Jexer, whose insectoid form seemed ill-suited for stealth. "So what's your story?" Kane asked, keeping his tone low. Jexar's mandibles clicked as he considered his response. "The Empire destroyed my colony. Forced conscription. I escaped and found others like me." Kane nodded, his expression neutral. "And you?" he asked Calrix. The fox-like alien smirked. "Professional thief. Empire didn't like me helping myself to their treasury. I figured it was time to change targets." Kane didn't respond, but he filed the information away. These weren't soldiers, they were survivors, misfits, and opportunists. Useful but unpredictable. The Central Maintenance Hub was a sprawling chamber hidden deep within the ship's infrastructure. It was dimly lit, with clusters of consoles and machinery scattered throughout. A handful of rebels were already there, their faces tense with anticipation. As T-Rhea led Kane into the room, the murmurs ceased. All eyes turned to the human, their expressions a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "This is him," Tyria said, her voice firm. "The Phantom." The room erupted into quiet, but heated whispers. Jexer raised a clawed hand, silencing the group. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We don't even know if the stories are true." "They're true," Tyria insisted, stepping forward. "I've seen what he can do." Kane, unfazed by the attention, crossed his arms. "Let's get one thing straight. I'm not here to play hero. I have my own mission, and it doesn't involve your rebellion." "Then why did you come with us?" Cowrix asked, his tone skeptical. "Because I need to survive," Kane replied bluntly. "And right now you're my best chance." Tyria frowned but didn't argue. Instead, she turned to the group. "We have an opportunity here. With his help, we can take control of the Eternal Dominion. Imagine the blow that would deal to the Empire." Kane's eyes narrowed. "You want to take the ship? That's ambitious." "It's necessary," Tyria said. "The Eternal Dominion is more than a weapon. It's a symbol. If we can turn it against the Empire, we'll inspire resistance across the galaxy." Kane considered her words. The plan was bold, reckless, but it had merit. If the rebellion succeeded, it would create chaos, the perfect cover for him to complete his mission. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll help you, but I make the calls when it comes to strategy." Tyria hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed." Lesra paced in her private quarters, her mind racing. The failure of the mind probes continued to gnaw at her, and the human's calm defiance unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She accessed a console and brought up Kane's profile, or what little there was of it. The records were sparse, deliberately so. His identity was a blank slate, with no ties to any known faction or organization. "Who are you?" she murmured to herself. A sudden chime interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Commander Vrelok standing in the doorway, his imposing figure framed by the corridor's harsh lighting. "Commander," Lesra said, inclining her head. "Report," Vrelok demanded, his tone sharp. "The prisoner remains an enigma," Lesra admitted, "but I'm certain he's more than he appears. He has advanced training." Vrelok's eyes narrowed. "Do you believe he's a threat?" "Yes," Lesra said without hesitation. "A significant one." Vrelok frowned, his golden eyes glinting with suspicion. "Then we cannot afford to wait. Increase surveillance across the ship. I want every deck, every corridor monitored. If he escapes, I will hold you personally responsible." Lesra's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Understood." As Vrelok left, Lesra turned back to the console. She didn't like being threatened, but she couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. The human was dangerous, and she intended to prove it. In the maintenance hub, Kane and the rebels gathered around a holographic display. The map of the Eternal Dominion hovered in the air, its intricate layout revealing the ship's key systems and choke points. "Our best option is the command deck," Tyria said, pointing to a section near the ship's core. "If we can disable the central controls, we'll cripple their ability to coordinate." Kane shook his head. "Too risky. The command deck is heavily fortified. We'd never get close without triggering every alarm on the ship." "Then what do you suggest?" Cowrix asked, his tone edged with skepticism. Kane studied the map, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the layout. "We don't attack the command deck. We go for the power core." Tyria's eyes widened. "The power core? That's suicide. It's surrounded by automated defenses."
"Exactly," Kane said. "Which means they won't expect a direct assault. If we can disable the core, we'll plunge the ship into chaos. No lights, no shields, no weapons. It'll give us the advantage we need."
Jexer clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "And what happens when the power comes back online?" "We won't be here when it does," Kane replied. "This isn't about holding the ship. It's about sending a message." The room fell silent as the rebels considered his words. Finally, Tyria nodded. "It's a bold plan, but it might be our best shot." "Good," Kane said. "Then let's get to work." As the rebels prepared for the mission, Kane found himself alone in a quiet corner of the maintenance hub. He leaned against the wall, his mind drifting to the past. He hadn't always been a hitman. Once he had been a soldier fighting for a cause he believed in. But the galaxy had a way of eroding ideals, of turning heroes into mercenaries. The Umbra Syndicate had offered him purpose, or so he had thought. Now, as he stood on the precipice of another impossible mission, he couldn't help but wonder if he was still fighting for the right reasons. T-Ray approached, her expression cautious but curious. "You've been quiet," she said. "Just thinking," Kane replied. "About what?" He glanced at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "About what happens when this is over." T-Ray hesitated, then said, "When this is over, the galaxy will be different. Better, I hope." Kane didn't respond. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the holographic map, his mind already planning the next move. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Vrelok stood at the main console, his gaze fixed on the swirling colors of the Andrillian nebula. He had ordered heightened security, but a nagging doubt lingered in the back of his mind. The human was out of place, too calm, too controlled. And if Lesra was right, he was a threat that couldn't be ignored. "Commander," an officer called out, interrupting his thoughts. "We've detected anomalies in the surveillance grid. Several cameras have gone offline in the lower decks." Vrelok's eyes narrowed. "Seal the area. Deploy patrols immediately. I want whoever is responsible apprehended." The officer nodded and relayed the orders. The lights in the central maintenance hub flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the room. The low hum of machinery formed an almost hypnotic backdrop, broken only by the occasional whispered conversation among the rebels. Kane stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed, observing as T-Ray finalized their preparations. The holographic map of the Eternal Dominion glowed brightly in the center of the room. Every conduit, bulkhead, and security checkpoint was displayed in painstaking detail. Kane's eyes scanned the layout with practiced precision, noting every weak point and blind spot. T-Ray turned to face the group, her voice firm but quiet. "This is it. The plan is simple: disable the power core, disrupt their defenses, and make our escape. Kane will lead the infiltration team. Jexer and Calrix will provide cover from the auxiliary control room, where they'll override the automated defenses. The rest of us will be on standby to extract you when the job is done." Jexer clicked his mandibles. "And what happens if we're discovered before the core is disabled?" T-Ray's expression darkened. "Then we adapt. We knew the risks when we boarded this ship." Kane stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The key is speed. If we're still in the core chamber when the alarms go off, we're dead. We move fast, we stay quiet, and we don't stop for anything." Calrix raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," Kane replied. "But if you stick to the plan, we'll make it out alive." T-Ray handed Kane a small device, a portable EMP generator. Its sleek, black surface shimmered faintly under the room's dim lights. "This will disable the core's defenses for 60 seconds, she explained. "You'll have to work fast. Once the shields are down, plant the charges and get out." Kane nodded, tucking the device into a pouch on his belt. "Understood." The group dispersed, each rebel preparing for their role in the mission. Kane lingered near the map, his mind racing with calculations. The power core was heavily guarded, surrounded by layers of automated defenses and patrols. Even with the EMP, the odds were slim. T-Ray approached him, her expression unreadable. "You've done things like this before, haven't you?" Kane glanced at her, his gray eyes cold and distant. "More times than I'd like to admit." She hesitated, then said, "Why do you do it? What drives someone like you?" Kane smirked faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Survival. Everything else is secondary." T-Ray studied him for a moment, as if searching for a crack in his armor. Finally, she said, "I hope you're wrong. Because if survival is all that matters, then what's the point of any of this?" Kane didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, his thoughts already shifting to the mission ahead. The infiltration team moved through the maintenance shafts in silence, their footsteps muffled by the thick, rubberized flooring. Kane led the way, his every movement precise and deliberate. Tyria followed closely behind, her blue skin blending into the shadows. Jexar and Calric split off at a junction, heading toward the auxiliary control room. The rest of the group continued toward the power core, the air growing warmer as they descended deeper into the ship. Kane raised a hand, signaling the team to stop. He knelt beside a grated vent, peering through the slats at the chamber below. The power core was massive, a cylindrical structure surrounded by glowing conduits that pulsed with energy. Automated turrets lined the walls, their sleek forms scanning the room with mechanical precision. "Looks like they didn't skimp on security," Tyria whispered. Kane smirked. "Good. I was worried this might be too easy." He pulled the EMP generator from his belt, its smooth surface cool to the touch. Turning to Tyria, he said, "Once I trigger this, we'll have 60 seconds to plant the charges and get out. No hesitation." "Understood." She nodded, her expression grim. Kane activated the device, and a low-frequency pulse rippled through the air. The turrets froze in place, their targeting systems temporarily disabled. "Go," Kane said, dropping through the vent and landing silently on the chamber floor. Tyria and the others followed, moving quickly but cautiously. Kane sprinted to the base of the core, his hands moving deftly as he attached the charges to the glowing conduits. 30 seconds, he called out, his voice steady despite the urgency. Tyria worked beside him, her fingers trembling slightly as she secured the charges. The heat radiating from the core was intense, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. 15 seconds, Kane said. A sudden noise behind them made Tyria freeze. She turned to see a squad of Empire soldiers entering the chamber, their weapons raised. "They're here," she shouted, drawing her blaster. Kane cursed under his breath, his hand still working to secure the final charge. "Cover me." Tyria and the others opened fire, their blaster bolts streaking through the air. The soldiers returned fire, the chamber erupting into chaos. "Done," Kane shouted, pulling Tyria behind a nearby console. "Fall back." The team retreated toward the vent, their movements frantic but coordinated. The Empire soldiers pressed forward, their numbers overwhelming. "We're not going to make it," one of the rebels shouted. "Yes, we will," Kane said, his tone cold and commanding. He tossed a smoke grenade into the center of the chamber, the thick gray cloud obscuring their movements. "Move," he barked, pushing Tyria toward the vent. They climbed back into the maintenance shaft, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. Kane brought up the rear, pausing only to detonate the charges. The explosion shook the ship, the shock wave rattling the walls of the shaft. The power core's energy conduits erupted in a cascade of light, plunging the chamber into darkness. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, alarms blared as the lights flickered and died. Supreme Commander Siler stood at the center of the chaos, his expression a mask of fury. "Report," he barked, his voice cutting through the din. An officer hurried to his side, his face pale. "The power core has been compromised. Backup systems are offline. We're running on emergency reserves." Slyer clenched his fists. "Find the intruders, seal the ship. I want them captured, alive or dead." Lesra appeared at his side, her golden eyes sharp. "This is no ordinary sabotage. Whoever is responsible has extensive knowledge of our systems." Slyer turned to her, his voice low and dangerous. "Then find them. And bring me the human. He's behind this, I'm certain of it." Lesra nodded, already moving toward the exit. In the maintenance hub, the rebels regrouped, their faces pale and their breaths ragged. The explosion had been a success, but the cost was high. 2 members of the team hadn't made it back, their names etched into the silence that hung heavy in the air. Tyria slumped against a console, her hands trembling. "We did it," she said, her voice hollow. Kane stood apart from the group, his expression unreadable. "It's not over yet. They'll be coming for us." "What do we do now?" Jexar asked, his mandibles clicking anxiously. "We fight," Tyria said, her voice gaining strength. This is our chance to strike a real blow against the Empire." Kane didn't respond. Instead, he turned his gaze to the holographic map, his mind already working on the next move. As the rebels prepared for the final confrontation, Kane felt a familiar sensation rising within him, the cold, calculating focus that had kept him alive for so long. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a savior. He was a weapon, and the battle wasn't over yet.